Hello and welcome to the Cut to the Race podcast. Sam's with me today, and we've also got a special guest by the name of Mike Caulfield. Mike, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely no problem. And for the people who don't know who you are, do you mind sort of explaining yourself very briefly for us?
Yeah, okay, so briefly, I was an F1 race strategist for 12 years plus over a span of 16 years. Yeah, and now I'm still working in the sport, but not quite on the front line anymore. So I was taking a little bit step back, but still doing quite a bit in terms of strategy analysis and that side of things.
And what about the teams that you've worked for? You've worked for Mercedes, Haas as well.
Yes, yeah, Mercedes Haas. First role was with Honda, which obviously became Mercedes. So yeah, so they're the three main ones.
So what what is how did you get into this world of being at the top of your game of F1, getting into obviously being a race strategist? It's not your average career route. I mean, everyone's a race strategist, right? We all point at the TV and say, "Oh, you should have pitted then." What are these guys doing? But obviously, there's a lot more to it, and you can't just go in as me or Sam.
Yeah, so I mean, to be fair, I mean, you make that fair point. It wasn't ever something I kind of looked at and went, "Oh, that's what I want to do." It never really crossed my mind. I went to university and did engineering, so I was doing aeronautical engineering, but at that point, it was covering a broad basis of things. So even when I started university, it wasn't kind of my case of, "Oh, I want to go and work in F1." It was an opportunity came up that Honda at the time were offering student placements, so year-long placements, and I applied, and I was lucky enough to get. I think at that point, I mean, they've grown massively over the time, but this is back in 2006. I was lucky to be one of six people who got a job there, which I was there for a year. I mean, the majority of that job role was in the vehicle dynamics group, so just basically learning the trade, really, just kind of looking at simulations, looking at all the kind of ins and outs of F1 back then. Um, but at that point as well in the sport, strategy was still a fairly new process. So I think you'd have been lucky. I think each team had a strategist, but that would have been it. There was no such thing as your kind of strategy groups, which you have now, where you've potentially got some teams which have got 4 or 5 or even 6 people working on them. At that point, it was you'd have one strategist, and then someone like myself I got the opportunity to help out. So I did a couple of days a week, doing a bit of support, and then over races, again doing that little bit of support, just bit of data analysis, really, just kind of processing it. Again, back then the tools were very basic, so a lot of it was kind of processing what do we want to see, how do we want to see it. Um, the timing wasn't as comprehensive as it is now. So I was, I guess, I was a little bit lucky at the point where I got into the sport at a time where the strategy was in a pretty infant stage. So yeah, I mean, like I said, the timing systems we were either having to use like OCR recognition to pull it off the TV feeds, and or we were then getting it from the PDFs at the end, again stripping it out there and trying to populate databases and bringing it in. But by doing that, you start to learn lots of ins and outs of, right, what else do we need to know? What else do we need to plot? How can we analyze the competitor nature? So yeah, like I said, I was lucky over that year. I got that taste of it and really enjoyed that side of things. Really, it was a case of not just the strategy as in like when to pit, but just the whole competitor analysis, how it ties in. And I think one thing which is kind of misunderstood from a strategy side as well, which kind of fans don't really take into account, or maybe don't know, is that it's not just strategy. You've got to have like a broad understanding of everything that's going on. So competitor analysis is a huge part of it, because you need to know roughly how your competitors are going to be fair to plan your strategy. So at that point, you need to have that understanding of the aerodynamics. You need to have a bit of understanding of vehicle dynamics. You need to have a bit of understanding of race engineering. So you touch on everything a little bit and just get that general understanding. And then even stuff like get to help out with, well, not help out with pit stops, but you go and do a pit stop analysis and you work with the mechanics. So it was kind of that broad spectrum, which got me interested in it. And again, even after that year, it wasn't that kind of fun about, right, that's it, I'm going to be a race strategist. I knew I wanted to get back involved in F1 once I'd done my year placement, but still that kind of role of going down and being a full-time race strategist still wasn't kind of top on the list. It was like, I still like to do a bit of race engineering. I like to do a bit of performance engineering. But again, that strategy role is quite key in getting that little bit of everything. Yeah, kind of. Well, you're a master of strategy and then not a master of anything else, but you know those little bits of everything else. So it was, that's kind of how it came about, really, and and kind of fanned the flames of my interest in it.
No, it's really interesting to see to hear how kind of infant strategy was, as recently as kind of 15 years ago, and obviously it's progressed a long way. What does that kind of look like now? Kind of what software systems, kind of level of information and data do you have, and how different is it from 15 years ago in that sense?
I mean, it's night and day. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it developed quite quickly from that early stage. So, like I said, I was there 06, 07 and came back into the sport in 09 or 10. So I was out for like a year when I finished off at uni, and then a little bit of a sabbatical just outside of work. And even in that stage, it had taken a little bit of a step as everyone had started to know the importance of strategy. But yeah, what I say now is like I said, most teams have got that kind of 5 or 6 people in the groups, and then lowest numbers are kind of 2 or 3, but you still got it there. Everywhere, all the time, all the software now is kind of live data. So you're looking at doing your live simulation. So as the data comes in, you're constantly doing your kind of Monte Carlo, your simulations, which your random variability. You've obviously got a lot of deterministic tools. You've now to a point where you've got so much data coming in, but like you've got obviously GPS, which is the huge one, which became available in about, I think it was about 2011, 2012, that came freely available to the teams, but you still had to do something with it. It was kind of a very raw feed. But that kind of GPS data that then takes that next bit in, because you can then start looking down that competitor analysis route, even digging into it, like feeding it into your own simulations, trying to work out kind of how your car compares to others when you're over a set variable, what kind of L over D ratio other teams are running compared to you, if you've gone down the right path or they gone down the right path, and so many little variables in that. And then going forward as well is you've obviously got the building of the video information you've got as well. So back in the early days, you'd have got the main feed, which would have been coming over a terrestrial channel, and you might have been lucky to have got an onboard or 2 onboards, but if you'd kind of got a German subscription, because at that point German Sky had it, whereas over here it was still on terrestrial TV, so they didn't have the kind of red button or any of that aspect. So you were like limited for your information you could get even on from a video point of view, whereas now you've got access to every single car's on board. You've got access to like the main feed, replays, high definition. So even doing that analysis for like the driver side of things, but even the competitor side of things is just you build on it. So it's kind of hard to explain. It's just how much you're going, because the data isn't exactly huge in terms of what comes in, but obviously we get timing in there, which is basically your 3 sectors, start finish line, speed traps, that kind of stuff, and then you get GPS. But then what you can actually do with that is a huge amount. So like you can just start plotting now. You can look at mini sectors of the lap. You can look at kind of your corner analysis split into your low, high, medium speed corners, like looking at all that. You can start delving down because you've got the GPS. You start looking into how kind of other teams are doing in terms of trying to track their fuel loads in practice sessions, which obviously gives you that better read of where you stand relative to them coming into a weekend. And it's this whole conversation going back over like a couple of years ago, where I said, obviously, some of the best races people have had we've seen are ones where practice has been wiped out, and that's because just you go into the weekends a little bit blind. But even then, a lot of the weekends you kind of follow on from years before. You've got enough data going into a weekend that all right, this season a little bit different because of the huge reg changes, the tyres change gone to the 18-inch rim, so you're a little bit unknown. But like say for last season, if you had any weekend, which was a 2-day weekend, or the practice wiped out, you had quite a substantial amount of data over the previous years where you could kind of go, okay, I'm pretty confident this is what the tyres are going to do. And you can once it comes in the race, again, once it comes into the race, the data's there coming in live, you can quickly track, right, what's our tyre degradation doing? Oh, this is our expected tyre degradation. Okay, we're on plan. Okay, it's a little bit off. However, you've gone into the race with your simulations looking at, right, the tyres are going to do this. What happens if they do, like, it's 2% worse deg, 5% worse deg, wear life's a little bit shorter. So as soon as the race starts, you can kind of pull it all out there and see where you line up. And I think it's just that ability to harness the data, which was there in the past. It was just difficult to access, whereas now it's gone, and all the software is built around that. So like every week, the software is kind of being developed to say, right, what else do we want to look at? What else can we look at? And there's always more views. There's always, you've come across a race weekend like last year. It was the Russia Sochi race where it rained towards the end of the race. Yeah, towards the end of the race, wasn't it? And it's that kind of thing. It's like, right, how could we have planned for that better? What could we have done with it? Because we've got all this data. We could have looked at this and got this data quickly to see how much of the track was this kind of intermediate conditions and how much of it was still dry, to try and get that changeover to, like, you had the Lando and Lewis one, and obviously Lando gambled on it, and they say, but if we were going, well, actually we didn't have a view where it was easily visible. You could see it, but you'd have had to do quite a bit of kind of dragging and dropping to try and see it. Whereas now we go, right, let's develop the software so that's visible straight away. It just picks up people on tires, picks up people on intermediate tires, and quickly shows, right, these parts of the lap are now intermediates. This is dry. Yeah, you should pit. And it's. I had a comment the other day. I read a comment in an article, and this is kind of because you hear a lot of people saying that, oh, it's all driven by computers, it's all driven by like software in these days and stuff. But I kind of class a strategist as a workman. So you can have all the best tools in the world, if you don't know how to use them, you still need to know what to do with them, what to look for them, and it's why I often talk to a lot of people, like kind of students and stuff, and say, oh, I want to be a strategist, and it's great, but be prepared that it'll take you 3 to 4 years of just kind of getting that experience. So it's different scenarios which come up, and you go, you get that understanding of how things happen and how you'd react to it, and yeah, it's just that process of building it, because there's lots of little bits and pieces. People, like you say, everyone's a strategist. Everyone comes on a Monday and going, well, I wouldn't have done that. It's quite easy in the hindsight to look at it, but at the time when you've got 7 things going on, it's you've got people talking 4 different radio channels at you to try and filter that out and get that best information.
So yeah, like you've said, it's about getting the data and then how you process it, right? And making sure you can find the key points from that. But in terms of your role as a race strategist, so we know on a Sunday you're on the pit wall, but on a Monday, there's clearly so much data that you've got to go through, right? Make sure you've got the right data for whatever's happening. How do you prepare for a race? You know, from Monday to when the race is live. What does that look like for a race strategist? Because, you know, again, a new F1 fan might think, you know, the drivers just turn up, go for a quick race. So do the teams. The more keen fans obviously know that this is a life. It's you've dedicated your life to this. So what's a typical week when you're working in F1 as a race strategist?
Yeah, so I think a good way to look at it is, take it from a Monday. I mean, more often than not, it starts well before a Monday. But so let's go back a couple of years ago when you had to do your tyre choices for and people had different tyre selections coming in. So at that point, Pirelli would, for a European race, would announce the tyres 8 weeks before the race, and for a flyaway it was 14 weeks before. So as soon as you got that selection, what tyres it was going to be, and you had to make your selection, you were then looking in at data to say kind of, right, what's what do we need? What do we do? So you start planning out your whole weekend. So you're looking at what you're trying to achieve, what are the possible scenarios going to occur, how the tyres going to behave. So in that point, you go, right, what tyres did we have last year? Did we have the same tyre selections last year for this race as we do this year? Have the tyres changed from last year to this year, as in Pirelli have changed the specification of the compounds a little bit? So in that situation, yeah, like say for flyaway, 14 weeks before, you were starting to plan your actual weekend out of going, right, what do we need to do? What do we need to achieve going into the race? What can we sacrifice? Because again, F1's a lot about compromises in strategy and setup. So sometimes you obviously can't run every single tire exactly how you want it before a race. So some things you have to go, right, we've got a 90% confidence that this tire is going to do this. So we can sacrifice running that on a Friday because we need to get information on these other two compounds. So you'd have to go through, you'd have your chats with your race engineer, you'd have your chats with your tire engineer, and you'd try and come up with a kind of, basically at that point, you're doing your initial simulations. So you're kind of say, right, what do we expect this race to be? Is it going to be a one stop? And if it's going to be a one stop, is it going to be between what two tires? And if it is a one stop, you generally it's a little bit easy in terms of tire choice because you go, okay, we only need two sets of tires. It's not a problem. Which two sets it is, it doesn't matter. We're going to carry one of each into the race anyway, because basically that's how the regulations go. If it's a two stop, however, and this is the situation you've got to go, however, what happens if we see something worse? What happens if the deg's worse and it goes to a two stop? What tyres do we need to have available for the race? And we can't have burnt up on a Friday. So you start going through all those scenarios, and you've got to kind of basically plan your weekend, plan what's your best scenario, what you're trying to achieve, what information you need to find out. So you go into the race going, I really need to get some information on this because we didn't run the, say for Melbourne last week, so we didn't run the C5 last year, it was a C4, we're running a C5 this week. So obviously we're expecting it to be a poor tyre, so do we just concentrate on making sure we got the information on the C2 and C3, or do we want to run that C5 at some point on a long run? So they're the kind of, in the past, they were the initial kind of conversations which we started having like 14 to 8 weeks before a race. And
so I'm a bit mind blown here. So you're in the middle of an F1 season, so you've got maybe a race coming out this week, but you're already thinking all the way down about strategy for a race in 8 weeks, like you've said. So
yeah, I'll put it one way. It's like this has changed now because Pirelli bring the same. Everyone has the same set of tires now, so they've changed that over. But yeah, ultimately, I remember one year because obviously the beginning of the season used to be the flyaways. So at the beginning of the season, you were generally having to submit your tire allocation in December. So one time I was having to do, I was doing on Boxing Day, I was doing some simulations for China because like it was due in on like the 2nd of January or something like that. So you kind of, and obviously everyone's off work, had been off work for a couple of weeks, but it was like, well, we really need to get that. I'll send that in and then we'll quickly have a quick meeting when we get back so we can issue it. Because everything, you do a presentation, you do it, and you kind of have these discussions because someone might, so F1's a team, so someone might come up with the thing. So, have you thought about that? And you're, that's a good point. Or the tire engineer might say, no, from the data I've seen from the kind of the Pirelli test data, like looks like the tires next year are going to be better, so we can probably be a bit more conservative. Or the track's changed, and it's kind of one year it was in August, and now it's been moved to March, or April. So like the weather conditions are very different, and actually what we saw in August isn't going to happen in August because it's 20 degrees cooler and that. But yeah, ultimately you were having to. It was. I'll remember because obviously most of the ones post shutdown are flyaways. So usually the last submissions of the season were always just before shutdown in August, and having submitted them was always a massive relief because you're like, now you can literally the second half of the season just concentrate on the races coming up without suddenly having to go, oh, actually I've got to jump on another circuit. But like I said, Pirelli have taken that away now, which, to be honest, I don't think it's affected the racing that much. I think it got to a point where generally most teams were bringing the same allocation anyway, and if not, by the time it got to the race and qualifying, we're pretty much the same. So it hasn't really affected the race that much, the racing that much. And actually in the increase in schedule and everything, that having that reduced down and that bit of workload off you is actually a massive help in that. But to go back to your original question, on a Monday, you basically be doing your kind of pre-event sim. So you create a pre-event report, so it's almost aligned to right what we're expecting at this circuit. Like just even basic things. So just giving a refresher on people. So like you say, right, it's this many laps long. This is what we're expecting in terms of pit stop loss. Last year's race, this was what we've seen we saw this many overtakes. They mainly took place at these corners. We're looking at an overtake delta of this amount based on last year. So you're going over like all the historical data. So you're building up that, and then you start building up a pre-event report, which basically puts this all forward. And in the same report, you'll then kind of put in, right, this is what we're expecting our tire curves to be. So your tire curves, your degradation, your wear life, your performance life of them, the offset between them, and how they line up. And then from a strategist point of view, they'll get entered into your simulations. So you'll do both a kind of free air simulation, so a deterministic one, so no traffic, just pure, right, what's the optimum stop laps? And then you start putting into your more complicated like stochastic simulations, so your Monte Carlo, where you start introducing traffic variables, has a slight reactive model. So you're trying to do pit stops, which see where the windows goes with your tire curves. Is it a one stop? Is it a two stop? Obviously, this takes into account what your expected pace is going to be. So you start presenting that to people as well. So this is our expected finishing positions, our expected qualifying position. However, like the midfield's often very close. You can say, right, we've got a transfer strategy here. So if we've got this X, Y, and Z. So you start pulling this all together in kind of a document, really, which then generally takes a couple of days. That'll take, your aim is to kind of get it done in Monday, Tuesday, because then Tuesday you have a meeting with everyone, and then you present this all. So if there's any questions that gets raised, it's just generally getting that idea across to the team. So making sure the race engineers are on board, the chief race engineer, the tire engineer, everyone has a discussion about it. But again, it's about planning your weekend out. So as a strategist, like I said, you've taken away that initial conversation, but I might come up to a race and go, I really need to, in free practice, really my main thing in the long runs in P2, I need to get this information on this tire. Like, it's a bit unknown. That's the most reliable session. So maybe we need to split the cars, have one car running a C3 and one car running a C4. I just need to get a good long run on them, and just to make sure, so we can just get my confidence on those numbers of what it was. And then we try and work out elsewhere how we can just get the little bits. But you try and put this across to the group, you put your kind of targets in there, and just make sure everyone's on the same page, really. So that's kind of your Monday, Tuesday that week of gaining a lot of historic data, running your simulations, having your meetings, having your discussions, and also you getting the information from other people. So like your tire engineers, your race engineers, your aero group will say, well, what kind of setup we're going for? How might this affect us? Any little variables like that which might come into play and into a race. Then on the Wednesday, you'll head out to a track generally. So it's kind of more, so I'm talking in general Europeans, it's more just of a travel day, but you obviously just start tying up, still doing a few more simulations. I always like say to people who ask me about strategy, and I'll come to this on a little bit later, but like, you can always be doing more. There's like, it's never ending, because there's always something you look at and going into it. It's kind of, I kind of class the Saturday night work as, so once you've got your grid, your qualifying and everything, everyone else goes off and can have a little bit of a chilled out night on a Saturday, or just sleep basically. Whereas a strategist then has to work until midnight, 1 a.m. to kind of go over your plan, get everything sorted. But it's kind of like revising for an exam. So you're kind of making sure you cover, you don't exactly know what the questions are going to be, but you've got to try and cover off as many possible outcomes as possible. So if something does arise in the race, you're prepared for it. If like, or even just, it doesn't even have to be a race. So you can be in your strategy meeting on a Sunday morning. You've just got to make sure you have an answer. If a driver comes up and goes, "Oh, what happens if this happens?" You've got to have an answer, because you've got to show some confidence and build his confidence in your plan. And if you can't answer something that he's asking you, he's going to start doubting out in the plan. So that's another part when I was saying that just becoming a strategist isn't as straightforward. You need to have that kind of experience and confidence and be able to be confident about talking to drivers, sell your plans to the drivers, get them on board with it, because ultimately if they're not on board with the strategy, it's going to struggle to that they're going to the way drivers work, they'll look for a reason for it not to work. So they'll be you hear them coming on the radio going, this isn't working, and Tyres, I said this was going to happen, etc. And that's a scenario where no one does it deliberately, but it's just a case of they've never really bought into the strategy, so they don't understand what the plan is going forward of why you're trying something like that. So yeah, so it's a busy week in that sense. Thursday, Friday, once you get to the track. Thursday's obviously setup day. You often have pit stops in there. You talk to the drivers for the first time, so you have a few meetings. Generally, the Thursdays taken up with meetings, just discussing setup, going over the plan again. Talking with drivers. Doing a track walk, checking the track itself, see if anything's different. Some obviously tracks have some slight changes which maybe make overtaking a bit easier. If you go into a new track, say Miami coming up, or even Melbourne last weekend where I hadn't been for a couple of years, and I had quite a few changes, looking for it and trying to work out what may or may not happen. Is the safety car probability going to be actually lowered because of the changes they made to it? The runoffs are quite big, or the runoffs aren't very big, so you actually got a high chance of a safety car coming here, or even a red flag. So you kind of think, right, okay, maybe we need to factor this bit more into our simulations. And it's basically that. And Thursday is just double checking your work, just going over it, just getting some ideas in your head of, again, what do I need to find out on the Friday? What do I need to look for? And then just going into it. And then usually Thursday as well, strategists tend to have a bit of a part in the pit stops as well. So doing a bit of pit stop analysis, just chatting to the guys. So that's kind of what both Mercedes and Haas, I was doing quite a bit of work with them, just doing a bit of pit stop analysis, because ultimately pit stops can have a big effect on your strategy. So I always talk it as fine, but a strategist should take interest and put work into the pit team to try and improve them and try and help them out, because ultimately they can help your strategy. If you've beaten someone in the pit lane and you've gone for an undercut or an overcut or something like that, you want that good pit stop. So you need to try and, obviously the pit guys want to do well, but you want to try and help them do what you can there. And then once you're into the weekend, it's just flat out from that point, just doing as much analysis as possible on that data.
And I mean, it sounds like mentally you have to be focused on the race weekend coming up, but also 2 months, 3 months down the line, or at least previously when you were kind of submitting the tyre choices. I think it was actually Gunther Steiner actually was one of the people who kind of said that taking that variable away was actually a really big help during COVID. But how many plans do you have over a weekend? Like, so you obviously have a plan A, plan B during a race, but like, how extensive does it go? Like, is there a lot of thinking on the fly? Like, how do you kind of keep calm in that situation?
Again, I think it goes back to a little bit of this, what I was saying about experience and kind of just knowing these scenarios. So ultimately you'll go into a weekend with, like you say, your plan A, your plan B, your plan C, and you kind of, your possibilities of, right, well, this has a chance of happening, this has a slightly less chance of happening, well, this might not happen, or this is something that is unlikely to happen, but if it does happen, this is what we're going to kind of go. So you try and cover off as much as you can, so there's nothing that hits you with too much of a shock. And that's why people do all these simulations beforehand, and that's why kind of car setups are more often than not, cars get to the circuit and they're quite well positioned, and setup is not too far off. So it's just a case of tuning it once they do the practice sessions and getting it. Then that's obviously a little bit here and there. And then obviously the cars which have a disastrous weekend, there's just not enough time to recover, in terms of if you turn up somewhere and you're up miles off the pace, there's just not enough running to be able to pull it all the way back. You'll pull some of it back, but probably won't get as far. So I think it's just that case of you plan for the most likely ones, because you can't plan for everything, because there's obviously millions of permutations of what could or couldn't happen, and it's just a kind of case of trying to recollect if something does happen, recollect your kind of situation of I've experienced that in the past, so this is what happened in this scenario. And a lot of this comes down to kind of like more often than not is if there's a sporting things or regulations kind of stuff, or something happens on track and you go, hang on a minute, you're not allowed to do that, and there's and you start having another thing the strategists tend to have is kind of an encyclopedic knowledge of the regulations. So you kind of like, no, yeah, man, he's broken a regulation there. You might not be able to. Well, I know some people who kind of literally call what number it is as well. I've never quite got to that stage, but you know roughly what the regulation is. It's definitely against the regs, and then your sporting guy or your team manager goes, yeah, okay, man, we'll get onto that about that. But yeah, it's in terms of plans, you need to be prepared because there's just not enough time to fully react. If you stand around for 20 minutes, kind of going, what do we do now? That's your practice session over, or that's your qualifying session over. So like, you need to be prepared as possible for the most likely scenarios, and even the unlikely scenarios. You've got. That's why the guys who work there, just not just strategists, but everyone there they're there for a reason. It's because they've built up their experience and they've built up their knowledge. And if you've got a crash or something, everyone knows. Get in there, like, this is what we've got to do. This is how we react to it. So I think that's the best way to answer your question. Really, is that there's you can't plan for everything, but you've just got to hope that you have planned for everything. And if you haven't, you just try and use you can't stand around thinking about it too long. You've just got to try and use your experience and work as a team and kind of bring it all together to get through it.
Almost like any direction is better than no direction. Kind of, you just need to make a choice.
Just not enough time in an F1 weekend if you're kind of stuck. That's it. You just every probably, like, I know people sit in the pits for every song, but every time you're not doing something productive. So if you're sat in the pits and not doing anything productive, and you're not on the track being productive, then you're losing time to it, because every other team is doing something. Even if they're sat in the pits, they're doing a setup change, or they're just doing a bit of analysis or something. So yeah.
So Mike, if I've understood this right, you would plan for a first lap incident, or a front wing being knocked off. You've already got the plan in place. You know exactly what's going to happen in that scenario, because obviously there's a higher chance of it happening. So I find that interesting. And as fans, we always wonder how on earth race strategists are so calm. But I think you've sort of explained that's because the plan's already there. You know exactly what's going to happen. But how do you deal with drivers that aren't calm in that moment? Because obviously they don't have a plan in their head for going in and having a bump on the first lap. So how do the drivers influence what a strategist would do?
Yeah, again, it's so for the drivers. I mean, unfortunately, we have you'll have a strategy meeting in a Sunday morning. So with the drivers, you have to go through everything with them. So you've got to go through the worst case scenario. So like you say, if this happens on lap one, this is what's going to happen. And most of them are clever enough to know that, okay, if this does happen, we're going to require X, Y, or Z. But this is what you kind of tell them. You kind of say, if nothing happens, we're going to be a bit stuck from this point forward. And if that's what it is, and they kind of get it, but you kind of try and, again, you've got to explain to them and kind of say, right, this is what happens. That from this point forward, we'll be hoping for a safety car at this point to try and get us back in it, or a safety car at that point, and we can try and do that, which may bring it in. Obviously, you're not going to be in an optimum position because you've had to make a pit stop on lap one, but it's disaster recovery at that stage. So you go through again the majority of the scenarios with the drivers, and obviously the best drivers take it in and understand it, and they'll know the situation. And then during a race, it's a case of sometimes it's hard because there's a lot going on in the race, and the driver doesn't know the situation, so he knows what position he's in. Well, sometimes he doesn't even know what position he's in, but like he can see the car in front, he can see the car behind, but he doesn't know the car what's on the edge of his pit window. He doesn't know that 3 cars in front have already made their pit stop, which is why we're doing that. So and which is why we're kind of pushing the strategy a bit longer before, and why it's slightly changed. So you've got to try and give them as much information as possible before the race to mitigate anything, but at the same time you can't overload them. So this is where sometimes this kind of back and forth comes in, and it sometimes sounds like it's them influencing the strategy, but it's not. It's kind of, it's already been discussed beforehand, so they're kind of reiterating maybe what the team's already talked about in the morning. So they'll be kind of like, why are we going long? And then the race engineer will then go back and say, because this is this, and then he'll know it. So it's just because you obviously can't give him a full breakdown of exactly what's happening everywhere in the race. You've just got to kind of build that trust with the driver that, yeah, what we're doing is correct. We're trying to mitigate for this, what's happened, but we're pushing on. It's all looking fine. And that's why often the race engineers go, no, we're good. And like, oh no, we got unlucky there because of the safety car. And yeah, it's that kind of explanation to the drivers beforehand, just to get them kind of in that position that they're not confused when it's going on, because obviously they're literally in a cockpit, and occasionally they see something on a TV screen going on the circuit, which like gives them information. But if we're not actually feeding them fully information, because we don't want to do that as well, you don't want to kind of give them a full P1 to P20 rundown of the order and the gaps between it, because by the time you get through that, you're back around another lap and you can't talk to them in corners. And so you've just got to be really kind of specific of what you give them in that sense. So yeah, but sometimes like they can, and they will kind of give a bit of feedback. So if you're going into a race where you're not sure how the tires are going to behave, and or you need the tires to behave in a certain way, and they can come back and say, no, I'm not, like you'll say pre-race, you go, look, right, we've got to make it to lap 19 on this, and then we can take it to the end of the race. And he's coming on lap 12 and going, I really can't make it to lap 19. We need to go to plan B. And it's like, you can look at the data and you can look at the lap times and you look at all the data we've got and you go, okay, yeah, he's not just saying it, he's really unhappy. Because sometimes they can just be saying because they're stuck in a bit of traffic. But at that point, you're still like, no, just getting out of traffic, we're still not better converting to a two-stop at this point. But if your tires are fully going off, then yes, we are better converting to a two-stop. So it's that kind of, yeah, it's that difficult thing of it. You can't overload them, but you still need to give them as much information as possible. So yeah.
And like, so like, I guess with some of the more experienced drivers, that can be the difference in some ways. Like, I guess Turkey would be a good example for, like, with Lewis in 2020, when when they didn't pit and they kind of, the inters would wore all the way down. I guess interestingly, you can look at Turkey in 2021 when Lewis was really unhappy about the strategy call that race. How does it differ working with an experienced driver versus, say, a rookie? Because obviously at Haas last year, 2 rookie drivers, and who's the best driver that you've worked with from that perspective? Because obviously you've worked with champions as well.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, obviously working with rookies and I actually really enjoyed it, because especially we're working with Mick, is that you can tell he's been brought up right, and he's been obviously brought through the Ferrari Academy, and he's really keen, he's really knowledgeable, and like he really listened, he asked good questions, and you could tell he just wanted to learn. So like you could actually give him that information, tell him to like how to develop. So he started becoming a little bit more of a kind of driver mentor more than anything, to kind of say, right, these are the kind of things we need to look at. And in that aspect, it was really pleasurable working with him. And then he often as well, with him like that, is that like he's not going to come shouting over the radio as well as a rookie, because he's still kind of, well, some do, but more often not, you kind of, for a start, like you've got to have a bit of a thick skin, and you kind of, if a rookie's doing it, you kind of just go, oh, that's what it is. It's like, but then the experienced guys obviously do know that a little bit more, so it can help you, but it also can hinder you, because they start getting a bit clever. So often you're like, I mean, in terms of Lewis, for example, it's like he's obviously world class. He's good and he knows exactly what he's doing. But then sometimes he'll come on and, like I say, he'll often make comments about his tires, about tires are definitely gone. And you said it so many times, my tires are gone, and then he pumps in the fastest lap. And like more often, like again, I say we'll go. You look at the data, they're not gone. And I kind of half the time he's doing it to try and I think because everyone's listening to everybody else's radios, so you're trying to kind of give that indication to. You're trying to get someone else behind you to use the tires a bit more because they're like, oh, his tires are going, we'll push that a little bit more, and it ends up them using the tires, whereas actually he's been managing them and he's got a bit more in it. So they sometimes have that bit more, few more tricks up the sleeves, which as a strategist, they're not going to make it open because they keep everything quite close to the chest. So you've got to be kind of aware with that in that respect. So that makes things a little bit interesting. But then at the same time, they are sometimes very good with their kind of feedback and their knowledge, again, that kind of experience of what they've gone through before and how you could possibly use that situation. But I'm not saying, but not all experienced drivers are like that. It varies. You can have a very good rookie driver who is probably better than a guy who's got 6 seasons under his belt. So it doesn't. It's very much the mentality of the driver rather than I kind of think their level of experience. Obviously, that bit of experience, if they've been through things in the past, can do it. But at the same time as well, that sometimes, again, with the driver, they'll see something happen in one race and suddenly think that's possible in every race, but it's not. So you've got to kind of try and get into the head for, no, just because he ran a 55, like the Albon one, just because he ran 55 laps on the C2 in Melbourne doesn't mean we can run 55 laps on the C2 in this next race. We should do that strategy. Well, no, it doesn't quite work like that. So
yeah, I mean, like with the Lewis thing, I personally love the Lewis bluff, and whenever Lewis comes on the radio and the tires are going, I think, all right, he's got another 20 laps in him, like, and he's gonna start bagging in those. It's almost got to the point that bluff is almost not a bluff anymore for him. Do you ever have any kind of like power struggles mid race with the driver, like them not coming in repeatedly after you've asked them to, or surprising you in the stop and being like, no, I'm done with these tires, even though you're saying all of our projections are saying stay out? Does that ever happen, or is that just not done?
Not really, no, because I think if it ever gets to kind of that stage in the relationship, then something's kind of broken down somewhere. You can kind of, again, like you just, the drivers are very much aware, and then again, unless something's broken down, but we have a lot more information than they do. They don't know what's going on. So if they're kind of like, we're not calling them in for a reason, and they kind of, we can see something, and we can like try and reinforce them. And if they're really not happy, then eventually they'll kind of, you got to put it in. So like you kind of get to give them information. You kind of say in the terms of the strategy, but they're coming on going, oh, my tires are done, my tires are done. He said, no, you're matching the pace of X, Y, and Z. It's fine. Strategy's on plan. You just got to reinforce them. So it's not so much a battle with them. You've just got to communicate correctly that they're obviously feeling something which they don't like, but you kind of got to make it as well for like, no, but in our race situation, it's fine. It's all right. We're not suddenly struggling to others, or vice versa. The difficult ones come, and it's not difficult, but it's the transitional weather ones, because the drivers have a lot better information than what we do on the pit wall in most cases. So like going to dry tires, like they can often tell in most cases as like, no, it's ready for slicks. So you'll more often than not, it's that understanding. But if we're going to dry, you kind of you often don't want to be the first one to do it, because you can often look like an absolute muppet if you do, but you can absolutely win it great. And sometimes you hopefully wait for one car, you can quickly check the sectors and go, no, fantastic, no, he's going quick, get him in. But everyone has that information, so you don't want to wait too long on it. So sometimes you have a driver who's that little bit more confident, go, no, it's going to be good going on to dries now. I reckon we can do it. And it's like, I can see the dry line. I've got a grip. It's okay. The difficult thing I think with the races we saw last year was that the intermediate, once it got down to a certain point, was actually behaving really well. So it was that difficult thing to go, right. It's obviously been Istanbul both years, and it's the nature of the circuit as well. But it was a very difficult one to call that, because the lap times weren't exactly going off on the intermediate, but obviously the guys going on to new intermediates were quicker, but at that point they were draining it. So it's that kind of balance out that could you just hang on to it enough to do it?
Sure, I guess it kind of that also plays into the kind of wider tapestry of not having been there for a decade almost, and also it suddenly being an October race, whereas it had always been a kind of first half of the season race before that.
Yeah, it was a couple of things on that one. Yeah, hadn't been there for a while. I mean, obviously 2020 it was freshly resurfaced. I think about 2 weeks before you got there. So I mean, we were walking around, cold weather because it was October, November, just been resurfaced. I remember walking around on the Thursday, walking the track, and it was like you could feel how slippy it was just walking on it. And then people went out on the kind of the first runs, and it was just like there was no grip, and there was no grip all weekend, because there wasn't much running on it. I think it was literally just F1, and I think it got to a point on the Friday night they sent a load of Renault Clio's round to try and grip it up. Obviously did nothing, but it was quite hilarious watching that. And then obviously last year, the track had weathered in a little bit, so it was that little bit better, and you saw the lap times a lot better, but it's still that nature that it didn't fully dry. It never got to that crossover, and it was a really strange situation. But because, again, the circuit's not used for any other point of the year, so you don't have that kind of rubbering in. It weathered a little bit, but you're seeing times where, like, it was really like the inters were going really quickly, compared to a slick time, and you think it never gets that. This in any other circuit, if your inter got that quick, you're like, oh, that inter's going to destroy itself, then you go on to slicks. But the inter got down, and then you like put the slicks on. It's like, no, it's still not slick weather. And it's a really strange case of it in Istanbul, and I think no one's really ever got on top of the full reasons why it behaves like it does. But no, it was interesting in that sense. But I think last year's one, everyone again was a little bit thinking about the year before. So obviously you're going, well, like, and obviously Lewis had it in his mind, go, I can't pit. I didn't pit last year, and we won the race. So I was like, I can't pit this year. And I was like, but because it weathered slightly, the tyres, the new inters on a slightly dry line didn't grain as much, so they had that bit better performance, which was better than So you just got to say, even year to year, things do slightly develop and evolve, and you just got to try and again figure it out as quick as you can.
So I want to talk a bit about the lifestyle of working in F1 with your team and sort of the dynamics of that. So obviously last year it was a long season, and they're only getting longer. What's it like being part of the race team? Obviously you get really close to your team, your drivers, all the personnel, and you're away from home a lot. Is this a second family? You know, what's it actually like being in F1?
I've got to be careful what I say here, I think. No, I mean it is a situation where you're spending a lot of time with people in close quarters, and it's you do notice that if you don't get on, if there's a bit of unharmony or like disharmony, in the team, it quickly comes out, and it's very important to keep that morale high. I mean, there's a split as well, but like mechanics generally have to share rooms, so they have that, whereas the engineers get their own room. So mechanics kind of obviously have that situation where they could be away for 3 weeks, sharing a room with another guy for that period of time. So if you're not sharing with someone you don't like, then obviously you're going to have potentially quite some unhappy people in there. So teams try and do what they can to kind of cater for that. And then I think it's like anything. It's like you're never going to be best mates with everyone there. It's a team, but like there's 60 odd people there, so you have your groups which you need to do. Well, you have your groups that make it survivable, really, because like you say, you're away from home for so long. You might want a close group of friends where you kind of go out for dinner and go like 3 or 4 of you go out for some food and a couple of beers and stuff, and then you get other guys who want to maybe sample it a bit more and go out a bit heavier, and like some of the younger lads who can cope with it a bit better than I can at my age now. and it's difficult. It's definitely. I don't think you can ever say like. I don't think anyone who works in F1 will come and say it's easy. It's because for the end of the day, we're there to do a job. So like you have something. A lot of places you go, kind of, you're at the circuit. You literally you see airport, hotel, circuit, and that's all you see. And then occasionally you get a couple of days downtime if you're staying out, like say it's a double-header flyaway or something. You might get a couple of days here or there just to where you can actually go to wander and go and see some of the sites, or just have a bit of a rest. And that side of things is nice, but at the same time, it's not easy. It's not the glamour and lifestyle, but a lot of people think it is.
Because as an F1 fan, right, we look at you and we think you get to go to every race. You've got tickets money can't buy. It's the dream. But are you still that F1 fan that watched it on TV, or does it change once you get into it?
I will admit that like it kind of it does drain you a little bit. So so obviously don't get me wrong. I kind of feel like the job is fantastic. You get to do a job a lot of people don't get to do. You do get to travel the world to a certain extent. Even if the paddocks just could be any country in the world, you kind of see the same thing. And you get to see the cars, you get to speak to drivers, you do a lot of things that a lot of people obviously would love to do. And it's that balance really, but you kind of, it's like, you have to make a lot of sacrifices to do it. So you obviously give up a lot of family time. And it's also not like we were chatting about earlier, it's not like we do the race and we come back home and then we've got a week at home just to chill out before going out to the next race. It's like, it's not okay. You get back home and then you're in work the next day. You're like, you have the engineers, you're doing all your post-race analysis, getting ready for the next race. The mechanics are stripping the cars down, servicing the cars, getting them rebuilt, getting ready for the next race, any developments in that aspect. So it's not like we just do the race and then it's kind of right, that's it, and then we'll go out to the next race, and we do that 23 times a year. So, and then on top of that, you've obviously got to try and make up with everyday life as well. So your partner who you've not seen for 2 weeks, or your kids or something, and like you got to kind of go and obviously put in a bit of time with them, and you've got to try and make up for not being around or not doing the school run and that aspect. So you've got those weights on that. So sometimes I know some people actually see the traveling out to races as a bit of a break because they're absolutely flat out trying to make up for going out for the races. But it's a great job. It is really a good job. But it's really, it is punishing. I mean, and I've seen a lot of people, especially the last couple of years, because COVID hasn't made things easy as well. Because obviously there was a lot of restrictions of we weren't able to go out, or you had to kind of stay in your hotel, and numerous PCR tests you had to do. So that made things a bit difficult. So obviously with things opening up a little bit more now, it's hopefully makes things a bit easier. And they're trying to help out by kind of increasing the curfew periods. But actually, what that's doing at the moment is it's just putting the same amount of workload into a shorter period of time for especially for the mechanics. So they're absolutely flat out, and like especially this new regulations trying to build the cars. With these new cars, there's always going to be issues. So they're working absolutely flat out, trying to build cars, trying to get it in before curfew. Basically, they're not getting to stop for a break at the moment. They're not even getting to stop to eat. They're getting a couple of sandwiches brought to the garage. They can buy that in between work. Then so they're doing kind of 15, 16-hour days flat out, and they do it. So, and this is the other thing with us is that when you go to a race weekend, it's a 90-hour week generally. It's kind of like you're not. It's not just the glamour of the couple of practice sessions. I mean, like the hours, like before the TV starts, the guys have been at the track like 4 hours beforehand, and after the TV finishes, they're there for another 7 hours. And all that time constantly they're like pushing it and trying to get everything done and trying to make it, and I understand. Like I see a lot of comments on kind of Twitter and stuff like that. But like the fans love it and the fans brilliant. And obviously, at the end of the day, that's what the teams do it for. So that's like it is it's a sport, but it's obviously if there's no one watching it, it would make no money, so it wouldn't exist. So it's that kind of crossover, but you have to do it for the fans. But it's going to come to a point if they keep adding races or if they keep adding this aggressive schedule that people just aren't going to do it anymore because it's not worth it. It's especially you'll get guys, and I already know it. I'm say you get a couple of guys coming in to become mechanics in the early to mid-20s. They do it for a couple of years, travel the world. Great, done that now. I'll go and do something else because I can get paid just as well to do something, but I'm actually sat at home. And I've got to travel the world. I've experienced it, got it in my CV, tick done. And then you're just going to start struggling to get that kind of personnel, but to have that longevity. So the quality will start to drop. And the same with engineers. You'll find that an engineer can actually I can go and work for that kind of like Land Rover or something and Jaguar like or something, and they'll pay me just as much to go and do this. And I work a 9 to 5 job and get paid overtime. There's no overtime or anything in F1. So it's that kind of balance. But if you start pushing it too far, the quality is going to drop in terms of the personnel working in the sport as well, and therefore then the quality will drop in terms of the racing, and then it's difficult. It's an interesting question. Like it's one that I think they just need to be cautious of as well, because I mean you don't need, in my opinion, you don't need to have 25 plus races a year. You like every weekend is ample. It's a great. It's like it's a nice because it's not like a football match where you stick it on for 90 minutes and it's done. Like, all right, if you just watch the race, it's 90 minutes. But if you want to watch all the build up for it, that's an hour and a half before it. Then you watch the actual race. Then you watch all the footage afterwards. And that's because F1 is as well. It's because there's a lot of stories. There's a lot of kind of information you need to gather before it. So it's not just the 90 minutes of the race and racing, because that's actually not where the full entertainment is. It's the kind of anticipation to come what's coming, and then hearing the interviews and hearing that respect about it, and or seeing the cars like in the pit lane and kind of getting the kind of technical analysis. And so if you start as a fan designating all your time to that, you're putting in good chunk of hours each weekend yourself, and then they get to a point where you start going, I can't do this every like 30 weekends a year, and then it starts devaluing it a little bit as well. So
I think you're absolutely right, and you know, if we feel like that as fans, you can only imagine the team members.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, just like don't get me wrong, it's like it's a cracking job. It really is, and it's something like I love doing, and I like that I'm still involved with it now, and slightly a bit of a further back roles, which suits my work-life balance a little bit, but you just got to be cautious because the other thing as well, like I've seen a few people like starting to actually get physically ill from it, and we're only on race 4, and it's just intense. It's because at the end of the day as well, it's like it's a sports-driven result, so like if you're working for a team like Haas last year, and I mean Haas, we still had to turn up every week. We still had to put the effort in. You still have to do it because sponsors are paying money. Fans are watching. There's still fans of Haas who want us to do well. And I see the comments last year. I used to read and we say, "Oh, this week we might get points this week," and you're there reading it going, "No, we won't," because it was that. I mean, last year it was that kind of we're not giving up, but it was just it wasn't going to happen, and that's the way F1s were. It's like. You can kind of know what's going to happen. You never get that. You get the freak result occasionally, but you still need to be in that position to take advantage of that freak result, which Haas unfortunately weren't last year. So you then get pressures on you from above. So it's not it's just we're turning up, building some race cars, racing around a bit, having fun, entertaining. It's like there's pressure on these guys as well. There's like pressures to get the cars built. There's pressures to perform. There's pressures from drivers, like from a strategist point of view, you're kind of there going, well, I really don't want to like mess up for this driver. I want to get this result for him. I want to I don't want to mess up this strategy. I need to put more work in there. I need to kind of make sure I've covered off all these opportunities and all these potential issues. So everyone builds that pressure, and then if results don't happen, like pressure builds, and it builds on certain people, and like you go back to this question where you all travel, you're all close knit, you're away from home with it. But once the pressure starts to build, people start to kind of get a bit edgy, and then you're away from home for 3 weeks and you've been under the same people, and someone who's even your best mate can really get on your nerves. And it's kind of like your pressure's built. Pressure does different things to different people, and while it might not come across and show it, it's a stressful industry as well, because there's a lot of money involved and there's people putting a lot of money into it. So results are important at the end of the day, because I worked with people who worked for Marussia Manor who've kind of gone under, so they've been out of a job and been that situation where a team's gone under. And while everyone looks quite stable now, you just don't know what's going to happen in the future. You don't know, like, if someone's just going to go, nah, I've had enough now. It's like, even up to the top level of Mercedes, well, it's doubtful. You might see that Mercedes board might start to go, no, we don't want to put the amount of money or the name into it anymore, and suddenly they're having to make 200 people redundant just to get it down to, because they can sell the team on, but someone who doesn't quite have the same backing. I'm not saying that is going to happen, but it's just that no team in that field, apart from maybe your Ferrari and Red Bull, is fully financially stable. And because F1's an expensive business, and unless you're winning, you're probably not going to recoup your money you're putting into it. So you need that backer in there, which is happy to, unfortunately, lose money, which not many people are.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly sounds like the highs are really high and the lows can be really, really low. And I guess one thing I would be interested to hear about is your kind of highs in the sport, like your highs in the sport. So what strategy calls have you been involved in that were kind of your favorite, or the ones that you were particularly proud of? And also, what are your favorite kind of strategy calls from all time? Because obviously the Albon strategy in Melbourne has kind of brought a bit of a focus to it of late.
Yeah, I mean, I think mine. So like I answered this the other day on Twitter. I think someone asked a similar one based on the Albon strategy. It was like, oh, what do you think is a really good strategy for done? I was like, from my point of view, it was the I know we got a penalty for it, but pitting under the before the formation lap in Hungary and when in 2020, so that to get off the wet tires and onto slicks to start from the pit lane effectively. And I mean, and again, this is it's a situation from that one where we needed to do something drastic to get points because the car wasn't very good. And you often, in the strategy point of view, if you put yourself in that position where you're actually running third or fourth, then you have a chance. If you're running down at that 13th, 14th, hoping that something happens in front of you, very rarely it does. You need to put yourself so that third or fourth, eventually, once it settles down, you still end up 8th or 9th, and you get that position. But that for us was fantastic. I mean, I really I was very happy with that. That's definitely one of my top ones. I think that's probably my boldest one I've done. A lot of them are just kind of, for me, it was just a lot of times my satisfaction and happiness in kind of strategy calls are just when a plan comes to fruition. So you can plan it out knowing like this is what we've got to be aware of. This is what we've got to. If we do this here, we've got a chance of getting this position, and then you do it and you get that position. Like, so you just do that undercut. So it might be only gaining one position or something, but kind of you've planned it out and you've kind of plotted out. You've told what's going to need to be done. You called it at the right time. The pit stop's good. Tires are good on the out lap, so you've got all that planned in. They cover it, try to cover the next lap, and you get that position. There is that kind of thing, like punching the air on the pit wall when you see yourself come out in front of that other car, and so it's just that kind of general one there. In terms of other strategies, I mean, it's a difficult one. Like the Albon one last week was great. I mean, that was kind of it was bold again, and it's one of those ones where you need to you need to roll the dice a little bit. You need to kind of do something a bit different. But actually, what people didn't actually kind of pick up on that one as well is actually the car performed a lot better than I think they were expecting. So if you actually look at the pace of it, he wasn't too dissimilar to your Alfa Romeos, your Haas, even your McLaren. It was like his lap times were actually matching them, in certain points in that race. So a lot of these strategies, which are bold, can only come off if the car has a bit of performance as well. So they're the kind of little factors to look at. In terms of kind of other people, I mean, I think the Lewis strategy, the Mercedes strategy in Barcelona last year was a good one. I mean, I'm quite like, as I've looked at it, like obviously it worked really well because he put the pressure on and made that second pit stop, and then obviously didn't give Verstappen the chance to react to it, and then caught Verstappen and passed him. I mean, I like a lot of people like look at it, and it was a great call, and it was because they looked like they were both on a one stop. But actually going into that race, I was already very much, that's a two-stop race. So I was like, when they did that, I was just like, well, yeah. It's like I'd already felt like, in my eyes, that was what the done strategy was. They pulled the kind of trigger a little bit earlier than it potentially was, but they made it kind of possible because I think Red Bull cornered themselves in that one. That, if I remember it correctly, they only had one set of mediums to use or something, whereas Mercedes had two sets of mediums or two sets of hard, or I can't remember which way around it was, but it meant that Verstappen couldn't go as early as what Mercedes pulled it because he only had like a medium left to put on instead of a hard or soft. I can't remember the ins and outs of it, but that was a good strategy because that was it's always those ones where you don't react to something. Well, you react to a situation. Go, okay, if we don't do something different, we're not gonna get the result we want. So we try something. Mercedes are like a little, just to put a bit of caveat on that strategy. While it was a good call, really successful. I mean, they didn't have anything to lose. Literally, if he pitted and didn't win, he would have finished second. It wasn't like he was pitting from second and potentially, if it went wrong, he was going to finish seventh. He was pitting from second, I think, behind Bottas. So he literally had to pass his teammate, and then he was back in the same position he was. The midfield strategies are often where it becomes a lot more complicated because to do something different, you're potentially costing yourself 6 or 7 positions. So you go, like you say, if this doesn't come off, I'm potentially putting ourselves out of the points. So it's in a touching place for a potential podium, say if a couple of cars drop out, to putting ourselves in 12th, and then you kind of, that kind of runs out. And then the other one from my side, I stands in, and it didn't work out, but it had that potential. So again, it was Interlagos in 2019. So the one where Sainz got on the podium, I think. And like, we were running with Roman, we were running right behind Sainz on a similar age tyres, and we decided not to pit on the safety car restart. Then, unfortunately for us, everyone came past us at the safety car restart, but they weren't able to pass Sainz. And like, he came in up, and then eventually, like, we couldn't get the tyres restarted, so it didn't work for us. But like, you kind of look at what Sainz accomplished from it, and then you kind of, this is what potentially could have happened. And we wouldn't have decided to finish on the podium, but if we just got that, like, if say the tyres had been 5 laps younger or something, or we just put a bit more temperature in under that safety car and got them restarted, then that chance of getting that podium was just there. And it just shows like kind of the fine margins on those when you're doing that kind of bold strategy. You can, like, Roman came up to me and went, well, we should have put in the safety car. I said, well, Sainz didn't pit, and he was like, worked for him. So I was just like, because I always get the other way, you always get either way. So no matter what you do, you're never right. When a driver comes in, you're like, as a strategist, like, you should have always done the opposite of what you did, basically. It's like, so if we had pitted, I can guarantee if we'd pitted under the safety car, they'd come back to me and went, Sainz didn't pit, look where he finished. and then because we didn't and he fell off, it's always hindsight with them. But yeah, so that was a good one. But yeah, like I said, the strategy ones are just generally, if you get a plan nailed on and everything comes right, because you put all that work into it. So all over the weekend, all the run up to it, building the data, building everything. It's like sometimes like you can do these kind of. And I had it in 2020 when the car wasn't very good, and it's kind of a case of we need to do something different. And you're like looking at it, going, I mean, this is going to work one time out of 1,000. It's like you might luckily get that 1,000th case where everything lines up perfectly, but like you're telling the driver, because the driver wants to go, I want to do something different. I don't want to finish 16th. I want to be in a chance to get some points. Okay, all right, this will get us points in this one specific situation. If we're running here, the safety car comes out, and this kind of thing. And this goes back to the point where I kind of said where you need that bit of car pace as well. If you're going to do something a bit bold, you need a little bit of car performance as well. Otherwise, your strategy, you're a little bit of a sitting duck.
Mike, the temptation right now to ask you about your view on the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix last year is killing me, but I'm not going to because we have run out of time, and obviously, we've had more than an hour of your time. So, Mike, it's been a journey. It's been a pleasure. I've learned so much today. I mean, Sam, are you educated?
Oh, completely. I found it fascinating to hear that level of depth. The depth, that goes into the strategy calls is I've really enjoyed it. So thank you very much.
Mike, for our listeners that want to follow your journey, you're a Twitter man, aren't you? How can they follow you?
So on Twitter, it's at Mike Caulfield F1.
We'll make sure we tag you on our episode notes as well. Mike, thanks so much for coming along, and hopefully we'll catch up soon.
Yeah, again, thanks for having me. No, that's been a great pleasure. And anytime you want me back on, if you need a bit of insight or opinion, then give me a shout.
Absolutely, and we have so many more questions as well, so we'll definitely get you back on. Thank you very much, Mike.
Cool. Cheers, guys.